But amidst the terrifying silence enveloping the magnificent main hall of the underground club, a fragile, trembling voice, yet laden with utter despair, tore through the tense, gunpowder-scented air, as the young girl raised her heavily bruised eyes to look directly at the man before her and softly whispered, asking if he was the one who had come to take her away from this hell. The most notorious and feared tyrant of the Chicago underworld suddenly froze, and in that single heartbeat, the ruthless monster did something beyond all bounds of reason, making a mad decision that would forever alter the entire order of the criminal empire here. Declan's cold, ice-colored gaze slowly lowered, sweeping over the frail figure cowering on the floor, capturing the image of a pair of thin, patchwork hands crisscrossed with old and new scars, yet glowing with a heartbreakingly resilient look. The ruler of the darkness, who inherently brought the muzzle of a gun and absolute wrath to level this filthy money-laundering den, now found his assassin's instinct defeated by a quiet stirring, causing him to abandon all his initial slaughter plans and issue a deep, gravelly order to strip all ownership of the girl named Clara from the madam named Evelyn. The command, dropped like an undeniable death sentence, left the entire group of black-suited assassins standing behind him in sheer astonishment, especially his scheming right-hand man named Silas, who was so stunned that his hand, gripping the butt of his gun, had to loosen before the unprecedented softness in a history of the bloodthirsty leader. Unwilling to lose her most precious prey, Evelyn panicked and rushed forward, her face completely drained of blood, intending to utter words of desperate dissuasion, but before she could utter half a syllable, Declan's pitch-black gun barrel unflinchingly pressed right against the center of her forehead, transmitting a thick, murderous intent as a solid promise of a brutal death if she dared to stand in his way. Everything around them seemed to hold its breath, leaving only the sound of absolute submission, and right then, without the need for any further coercion, Clara bit her lip hard, her bleeding, bare feet staggering yet trembling with determination as she followed the broad, steadfast back of the man who had just claimed her life, accepting the gamble of her dark fate into the hands of the stranger who had just become the new master of her life. The tempestuous vehicle tore through the cold night of the vast city of Chicago, carrying two fates that had just accidentally collided amidst an earthly hell. The atmosphere inside the armored car thickened and became so suffocating that it felt as though it could choke every breath of those sitting within that confined space. Clara shrank into a tight coil in a corner of the excessively large leather seat, her scarred hands clasped tightly together in deep anxiety, while her ash-gray eyes could still not hide her terror, mixed with a creeping curiosity as she stealthily observed the dangerously intimidating man sitting directly across from her. The underworld tyrant named Declan maintained a terrifying pensiveness, his sharp, ice-cold gaze firmly fixed on the trembling, small silhouette of the young girl, while his mind ceaselessly spawned agonizing questions about why someone so consistently cold-blooded, ruthless, and strictly governed by absolute reason like him would suddenly bring home an incredibly troublesome burden that was not part of any blood-soaked plan. However, in complete contrast to his callous exterior and the cold calculation in his thoughts, the massive hand of the monster, once stained with countless crimes, slowly removed his expensive woolen coat, which still bore traces of dark red blood and the acrid smell of gunpowder, and gently reached out to drape it over her frail shoulders, which were violently shivering from the piercing cold. That unusually gentle and utterly contradictory action caused Clara to startle slightly in panic, but the moment the warmth from the thick fabric enveloped her fragile body, for the first time in all the youthful years she had been trampled beneath the muddy depths, she unexpectedly caught a strange scent of absolute safety, even as it was profoundly intertwined with and besieged by the pungent metallic tang of violence and the deadly perils always waiting to swallow anyone who dared to step near the one known as the Devil. The heavy armored convoy rolled through the massive, heavily guarded iron gates and entered the sprawling grounds of the Vance estate, widely known as an impenetrable fortress in the heart of the underworld. Stepping out of the vehicle, Clara could not help but feel overwhelmed and trembled before the breathtakingly magnificent opulence of the place, her weary ash-gray eyes gazing in bewilderment at the marble walls and the brilliant crystal chandeliers. Right in the main hall, an older housekeeper named Helen stood waiting. She received the petite girl with an incredibly professional yet equally gentle and unhurried demeanor, offering a rare warmth that utterly contrasted with the cold, deathly aura blanketing the tyrant's domain. Under the caring attention of Mrs. Helen, Clara was allowed to soak in warm water for the first time, washing away the filth of the underground club, and was gently treated with medicine for the countless bleeding, torn wounds left ruthlessly on her pale skin by the brutal lashings of Madame Evelyn. When the night fell and enveloped everything, the young girl lay tossing and turning, unable to catch a wink of sleep on the massive, soft bed in the midst of the extravagantly opulent bedroom. Casting an empty gaze up at the elaborately carved ceiling, a sorrowful train of thoughts suddenly flashed through her trauma-riddled mind, making Clara bitterly realize that she seemed to have only just luckily escaped a rusted iron cage filled with blood and tears, only to inadvertently step into a brilliant golden cage that was equally suffocating, ruled and mastered by the very hands of the devil species. Amidst the profound, desolate night completely surrounding the magnificent fortress of the Vance family, the ghosts from her dark past rose once more to tear at Clara's already heavily wounded mind. The little girl thrashed on the massive bed, cold sweat breaking out and soaking her forehead as the nightmare strangled her chest, vividly replaying that horrific moment years ago when her biological father, driven by colossal debts, heartlessly dragged his own flesh and blood away to sell to a criminal ring. Her desperate screams, mingled with panicked sobs, abruptly tore through the silent stillness of the space, echoing all the way down the deserted hallway. Without hesitating for even a single breath, Declan took long, hurried strides and used a powerful force to bust open the sturdy oak door to rush straight inside. Striking his sharp, ice-colored eyes was the image of Clara curled up, trembling, and burying her head into the darkest corner of the room, her ash-gray eyes wide with sheer terror, as if she were still trapped in that shattered hell. In complete contrast to his ruthless exterior and the hands that were only accustomed to sowing death, the notorious boss of the underworld awkwardly knelt on the carpeted floor, reaching out his solid arms to fully embrace the small body that was constantly and violently struggling. He held her tight within his broad chest, clumsily stroking her tangled hair with a gentleness that had never existed in his violent life, while at the same time raising his deep, gravelly voice, carrying the authority of an absolute command but filled with steadfast protection, in order to calm a soul in utter panic. Right in that most lonely and vulnerable moment, the devil's first promise, carrying the weight of 1,000 pounds, rang out, with every single word piercing deeply into Clara's heart as he declared that no one would ever have the right to hurt her again, unless they dared to step over his dead body. A few slow weeks passed since that terrifying night, and Clara gradually grew accustomed to the quiet pace of life, which was latently filled with extreme tension inside the magnificent fortress of the Vance family. Through the slightly ajar gaps of the large office doors, the little girl quietly took in many times the way the man she was relying on ran an entire massive underground empire, where he judged the lives of countless others with a cold-blooded and decisive attitude so severe it was ruthless. However, her increasingly apparent existence in the mansion became a stinging thorn in the eyes of Silas, the henchman and the deeply ambitious right-hand man of Declan, a man who began to not hesitate in clearly showing his bitter hostility whenever he accidentally ran into her in the empty corridors. He dropped sharp insinuations like daggers, mocking that she was ultimately nothing but a fragile plaything for amusement, a hindrance that would sooner or later weaken the notorious tyrant and cause him to lose his inherent focus on the throne of crime. Every venomous word, along with the chilling murderous intent radiating from Silas, made Clara's scarred heart shudder with terror. But recalling the steadfast embrace and the protective promise of that night, she decided to bite her lip hard and chose the path of silent endurance, burying all threats deep in her heart simply because she did not want to become a burden or personally cause any more trouble for the only man who had reached out to pull her out of the dark abyss. Yet the submissive endurance of the little girl did not in any way soothe the fire of envy and malice that was increasingly erupting fiercely inside the highly ambitious right-hand man. Hidden behind the dark patches of a deserted harbor scattered with rusted shipping containers on a night when thick fog besieged the city, Silas strode with a face radiating murderous intent and a dissatisfaction rising all the way to his throat as he witnessed the leader, who once sowed terror throughout the entire underworld, now gradually becoming soft-hearted and neglecting his ambitions of territorial expansion just because of a prey scavenged from a filthy brothel, for he could not accept the fact that the empire he had dedicated half his life to building was being threatened by the foolish infatuation of a man who was losing his inherent cruel identity. For that very reason, in the thick darkness of crime, Silas secretly arranged a treacherous meeting with Viktor Romanov, the notoriously brutal kingpin of the Russian Mafia gang known as the Bratva. Under the dim, flickering glow of the streetlights, two sinister smiles met, sipping wine as red as blood together, and began to weave a deadly pact. Silas heartlessly cast aside his loyalty, offering up the internal security secrets of the Vance family to outline a perfect plan to use the cold-blooded assassins of the Bratva faction to completely eradicate the thorn in his side named Clara. The crazed henchman believed that the tragic death of the weak girl would be the most devastating spark to burn away all distractions, fully awakening the monster Declan to discard such soft affection and return to his blood-stained throne. Or if that tyrant had sunk too deeply into the swamp of love and collapsed, Silas himself would seize the opportunity to deliver the fatal stab, overthrowing him to personally take the supreme crown of power that controlled the entire underworld of the city. Yet while malicious plots were stealthily closing in from the shadows, Declan Vance, with the astute eyes of a seasoned predator, had already realized that deep within Clara's ash-gray eyes there always remained a constant terror and the weak, submissive mentality of a docile prey waiting for the day it would be butchered. That he understood that sturdy marble walls or dozens of armed guards outside could not forever protect her from the brutal underworld, so the tyrant decided to personally pull her down into the cold, soundproof shooting range located deep beneath the mansion to directly teach her how to use a lethal weapon. Standing amidst a space reeking of metal and gunpowder, the devil did not hesitate to step forward, pressing his broad, solid back against her frail, slightly trembling body, reaching out his arms to completely envelop her small, patchwork hands to guide her on how to raise a handgun to eye leveled at every steady breath brushing against her ear, along with the bodily friction through layers of fabric, created a powerful, bewitching electric current running down her spine, awakening intense and taboo emotions never before felt between two deeply scarred souls. Under the steadfast guidance and the suffocating pressure from the grip tightening on the trigger by the most powerful man in the city, a dry, metallic gunshot rang out, tearing the eardrums, and the bullet lodged accurately dead center in the bullseye. Looking at the smoking hole on the target board, Clara's heart beat rapidly, but her fear suddenly vanished, replaced by a profound realization when it dawned on her that this devil had absolutely no intention of imprisoning or raising her like a weak, ornamental bird to be amused within a golden cage, but rather, he was sharpening her, handing her the most ruthless power so that she would have the courage to defend herself and take the life of anyone who dared to threaten her very existence. But the fragile confidence that had just begun to bloom within Clara's fractured soul after the shooting session in the basement could not last long before the dark ghost from her filthy past rose once more to ruthlessly deliver a fatal blow to the seemingly impenetrable fortress. Due to a sophisticated security loophole intentionally created by the right-hand man named Silas while dispatching the defense systems, the foul henchman of Madame Evelyn managed to successfully send a freshly blood-soaked, foul-smelling parcel straight to the magnificent mansion, containing disgusting threats aimed directly at Clara. When she personally opened that box steeped in the aura of death, the young girl's ash-gray eyes instantly widened in sheer panic, her entire body shaking violently with the fear that the vision of her past hell would repeat itself and drag her back to the tear-soaked iron cage of former days. fully awakening the destructive rage inside the monster Declan and causing it to explode more fiercely than ever before. Seeing the girl he had sworn to protect cowering in panic, the notorious tyrant could not restrain his furious wrath, swinging his arms to smash all the luxurious furniture around him into shattered pieces scattered across the floor, and immediately ordered the dispatch of dozens of his most combat-ready assassins, armed with heavy firepower, to level all remaining remnants of the underground club named the Gilded Lily right in the dead of that very night, using bright red flames to burn everything to ashes in order to extinguish the arrogance of the enemy and to prove irrefutably to Clara that her agonizing, tormenting past had been completely eradicated from this world by his absolute power. When the brutal flames incinerating the remnants of the underground club slowly died out on the other side of the city, it was also the moment the chaotic emotions long suppressed within Clara's mind began to erupt fiercely following a terrifying night of threats filled with blood and tears. Listening to the heavy breathing and witnessing the crime-stained hands continuously bleeding from Declan's rage-fueled destruction of the furniture, the young girl with ash-gray eyes suddenly awoke and realized a heartbreaking truth that all the bloodthirsty brutality this tyrant had just displayed actually stemmed from an intense desire to shelter and protect her from every harm of the dark underworld. No longer allowing fear to control her reason or cowering like a weak prey awaiting judgment, Clara summoned all her courage to take the initiative and step into his quiet room, heavy with the scent of cigar smoke, bravely reaching out her patchwork hands to touch his angular face, tense with fury, in order to completely dismantle the final defensive wall separating their two deeply fractured hearts. Right at the moment their eyes met in a hazy space, their first kiss unexpectedly took place like a storm, sweeping away all reason, not gentle or shy, but incredibly fierce, burning with a tearing despair and heavily marked by an absolute possessiveness from both sides. Their burning breath intertwined with the salty taste of tears on their lips, completely burning away all prejudices, causing the cruel, thin line between the ruthless captor and the pitiful captive to finally blur into nothingness, leaving behind only the frantic connection of two people desperately yearning to find each other in an earthly hell. The warmth mixed with the bittersweet aftertaste of that pivotal first kiss had not yet been able to fully soothe the deep cracks in Clara's soul before another storm of blood and fire suddenly struck, tearing through the silent night of the magnificent fortress. Piercing alarm bells and the rapid footsteps of heavily armed guards echoed throughout the dark corridors, carrying urgent news of a brutal, large-scale attack aimed directly at the vital underground cargo ports that brought immense revenue to the Vance family. Not stopping at stealthy ambushes like before, this bloody event was an arrogant and openly provocative challenge sent by Viktor Romanov, the cunning, brutal leader of the notorious Russian Mafia gang named Bratva, aiming to overthrow the throne of the king who ruled the underworld. Facing the brink of a life-or-death war, the monster Declan had to suppress the intense emotions that had just bloomed with the woman he loved, decisively letting go of the warm embrace holding her tight in order to don the cold armor of a tyrant that he was forced to leave the heavily fortified mansion for many grueling days, thrusting himself into negotiations reeking of gunpowder and personally commanding bloody retaliations to extinguish the madness of the distant enemy. Left behind the marble fortress walls and enveloped by an overwhelmingly strict security perimeter with dozens of elite gunmen standing guard day and night, Clara was suddenly plunged into a state of utmost, solitary emptiness. From a prey who only knew how to fear for her own cheap life in the dark past, the little girl now endured long, dragging days steeped in agonizing longing and a heart-wrenching anxiety, counting every second and minute that passed, silently praying for the safety of the man known as a devil to whom her heart had inadvertently surrendered a love so profound there was no turning back. The faint morning sunlight gently slipped through the curtains, shining directly on her pale face after a sleepless night, but it seemed the exhaustion had given way to a strangely steadfast determination following the truths he had just laid bare the night before. He stood deep in thought by the windowsill, casting his eyes out at the desolate garden after the storm of emotions had just swept between the two of them, and he understood that the road ahead would no longer have room for sweet lies or further evasions of responsibility. That when all the secrets regarding the letter hidden for the past 10 years were unraveled, both realized they could not continue to flee the pursuit of faceless figures who constantly yearned to usurp the family heirloom. That she stepped forward, placing her thin hand upon his shoulder, and her voice, though soft, sharply parted the silent atmosphere, demanding that he return with her to the wooden cabin on the foggy hill to search for the final piece of the unfinished puzzle. He turned to look deeply into eyes that held the reflection of a whole sky of stormy pasts, then gave a slight nod of agreement, marking a new turning point on the journey to rediscover peace for themselves. The two quickly packed their belongings, taking only a few worn clothes and the yellowed notebook, stepping out of the apartment door to fade into the hurried, bustling crowd moving through the heart of the vast city. This trip was not merely an escape from the dark shadows trailing at their heels, but also a journey deep into each person's inner self, confronting wounds that had never truly closed. The rattling bus rolled along, carrying them away from the prosperous urban life, making way for rows of trees that continuously ran backwards, as if taking with them the sorrows left behind in a fading past, preparing them to embrace an even greater storm waiting at the end of the road. The barren bus trip finally came to a halt at a remote crossroads just as the sun began to cast its shadows towards the west, giving way to a thick layer of fog that was slowly swallowing the solitary hill before then. The two stepped off the bus in tense silence, letting the piercingly cold winds rush through their thin clothes, and walked side by side along the familiar, rugged gravel path toward the wooden cabin, sitting lonesome halfway up the slope. The scenery here seemed unchanged since the day they left, but hidden deep within that desolate stillness was a suffocatingly tight sensation, as if countless invisible eyes were watching every tiny movement of the two. He reached out to gently push the rotting wooden door, which let out an ear-piercing creak that shattered the quiet atmosphere, revealing a dark room coated in a layer of time's dust, with intricate spiderwebs encasing every corner of the walls. She carefully turned on the small flashlight she brought, illuminating every familiar nook, then flipped open the yellowed notebook to cross-reference the bizarre symbols that the family ancestors had meticulously recorded generations ago. After several hours engrossed in overturning every floorboard and piece of antique furniture, his attention suddenly stopped at a brand new scratch on the wooden wall behind the abandoned fireplace, which was the hiding place of the final piece of the heirloom. The heartbeats of both seemed to skip a beat upon realizing they were not the only guests who had just visited this place, and those ruthless hunters were perhaps only a razor-thin distance away from them. Just as she was about to reach her finger to touch the secret partition behind the broken brick layer, a chilling rustle suddenly echoed from the dense forest behind the house, forcing him into a lightning-fast reflex, pulling her down to nestle closely into the darkest corner of the room, both holding their breath as they waited for the true danger to begin knocking on the door. Heavy footsteps pounding on the decaying wooden porch outside tore through the solitary night, causing every nerve of the two to stretch taut like a bowstring in a life-and-death moment hanging by a single hair. Through the narrow gap of their hiding spot, he vaguely recognized the massive silhouettes of two strange men draped in black tarpaulin coats, shining their flashlights to scrutinize every inch of ground around the abandoned fireplace area. Her breath hitched in her throat as the blinding beam of light inadvertently swept across where they were hiding, but fortunately, the dense dust of time and the thick darkness became a perfect shielding curtain. Wasting not even a single precious second, the moment they slightly relaxed their attention and turned their backs toward the dilapidated kitchen, he immediately signaled her with a firm squeeze of her hand, then gently slithered toward the broken brick wall. With all the dexterity and caution forged through days of relentless running, he slipped his trembling fingers deep inside the cold partition and burst into silent tears when he touched a small, elaborately carved wooden box that the ancestors of the family had painstakingly hidden for generations. Just then, an ear-splitting thunderclap roared, tearing the night sky, signaling a furious thunderstorm about to pour down on the foggy hill, and that deafening sound unintentionally drowned out the soft noise as he hastily withdrew the heirloom from its sealed resting place. The hunters were startled by the fierce thunder and instantly turned around, but by this time, he and she had retreated as fast as lightning toward a loose floorboard in the corner of the room, which was the entrance down to the secret underground tunnel mentioned in the yellowed notebook. The damp darkness of the cellar immediately swallowed their frail figures, leaving behind, above the canopy, the frantic smashing and venomous curses of the ruthless hunters upon realizing that their prey, along with the coveted treasure, had just slipped through their fingers by a mere inch. Down the narrow passageway reeking of mud and mold, she gripped tightly onto his shirt hem while both continued to grope their way with aimless steps deeper into the earth, carrying a fragile flame of hope just kindled from the cold wooden box resting securely in his cherishing embrace. The narrow and wet underground tunnel stretched seemingly endlessly beneath the earth, bringing a bone-chilling cold that gradually seeped into every fiber of their being as they trudged forward in the thick darkness. The squelching sounds of footsteps in the muddy sludge and their rapid breathing seemed to be swallowed by the eerie silence of this imprisoning space, causing her to stumble many times, but his sturdy hand always caught her in time, salvaging her dwindling strength. After many hours of crawling through narrow, caved-in sections of the tunnel, the space finally suddenly widened, leading them into an underground limestone cave where countless stalactites hung down, glittering under the dimming light of the nearly depleted flashlight. However, the hope that had just sparked hastily withered away when blocking their only path forward was a colossal, moss-covered stone door engraved with ancient characters identical to the patterns on the wooden box he was holding tightly to his chest. With no way back and unable to hear the noises of the hunters above, he carefully placed the treasure box down on a flat rock, exchanging a resolute gaze with her before using his bleeding fingertips to gently pry open the rusted brass lock. A soft click rang out amidst the desolate space, accompanied by a freezing draft escaping from within, revealing not gold or jewels, but a rolled-up parchment of sheepskin along with a jade stone bearing a blood-red hue, emitting a bewitching light that sharply illuminated the ancient writings on the stone wall ahead. Every stroke on the parchment began to perfectly align with the grooves on the door, acting as an answer to the hundred-so-fire-souled mystery of the family, demanding that they make a life-or-death decision right at the very edge of this world of light. The brilliant red glow from the jade stone illuminated his tense face as his eyes scanned rapidly over the lines of ancient script on the tattered sheepskin parchment, searching for the answer to this ultimate trial. The scroll explicitly stated that to awaken the secret mechanism hidden deep within the colossal stone door, the one bearing the family bloodline must personally place the gemstone into the central hollow and pay the price with a drop of fresh blood, connecting life to the origin that had slept for centuries. He turned to look at her with an unwavering gaze tinged with pity, for both understood clearly that once this door opened, they would forever have no way back to their old lives, and their destinies would be tightly bound to the ancient secrets waiting to swallow their fragile lives. Without the slightest hesitation, she grasped his rough hand and gave a decisive nod, imparting further strength for this life-and-death decision. He took a deep breath, then decisively used the tip of a small dagger to make a shallow cut on his thumb, allowing drops of dark red blood to drip onto the surface of the jade stone before carefully placing it right into the central position of the stone archway covered in green moss. The moment the gemstone locked into the hollow, a deafening rumble echoed back from the depths of the earth, shaking the entire limestone cave, causing the stalactites high above to sway and fall down in pieces onto the wet ground. The heavy stone door slowly creaked open, drawing out thick clouds of dust and a biting draft like the breath of the underworld pouring out, carrying a mysterious rustling sound that lured the footsteps of the two forward into a space blazing with a strange light, completely different from the darkness of the outside world. Holding hands tightly, they bravely crossed the boundary between reality and myth, leaving behind the gloomy darkness of the underground tunnel to officially confront the truth that their ancestors had paid for in blood and tears to preserve until this very day. Stepping over the stone threshold, Both could not help but be overwhelmed by an incredibly vast space lit up by countless natural crystals deeply embedded in the cave walls, radiating a soft, gentle light like a full moon. Instead of chests filled with gold and jewels as rumored by antique hunters, what appeared before their eyes was an ancient shrine featuring towering stone statues carved in the images of their ancestors, standing solemnly to protect a marble pedestal reigning in the very center of the room. He gripped her hand tightly, slowly advancing toward the stone pedestal where a transparent sphere sat, continuously swirling and emitting brilliant, primordial streams of energy. When the distance was reduced to just a few steps, the sphere suddenly resonated fiercely with the blood just dropped outside the cave door, shining bewitching beams of light straight into his mind, creating a whirlwind of memories that exposed the entire brutal truth of the family. The flashing images made it clear that the heirloom was actually not an item of great monetary value, but a grand seal confining a catastrophic seed of humanity, and that his generation was born to act as the temple guardians, shouldering the mission of protecting the world at all costs, even if it meant sacrificing themselves. Realizing the 1,000-pound weight of destiny that had just crashed down upon his shoulders, he staggered backward, but luckily, her warm embrace caught him just in time, completely wrapping around his shoulders that were trembling in waves of shock. The quiet and sacred atmosphere did not have time to last before an earth-shattering explosion suddenly roared from the pitch-black tunnel just behind them, signaling that the hunting party had used powerful explosives to blast away the obstructing limestone. Seeing the debris from the cave ceiling raining down, signaling an unavoidable direct confrontation, he hastily wiped a drop of cold sweat from his forehead, then pivoted to stand squarely blocking her, his piercing gaze aimed straight at the dark expanse now trembling violently, ready to use his last ounce of strength to protect the sacred seal and the most important woman of his life. The blinding dust from the explosion billowed through the shattered stone doorway, carrying the acrid scent of gunpowder and the bloodthirsty presence of the treasure hunters, who had finally charged straight into the sacred shrine. Piercing through the thick mist, the silhouettes of three massive men wielding cold weapons gradually became clear, their eyes blazing with bottomless greed as they stared intently at the crystal spheres shining brilliantly upon the marble pedestal, entirely ignorant of the horrific disaster sealed within. The ringleader sneered with a sinister grin, pressing closer with each step, and menacingly raised his voice, demanding that he obediently step aside and surrender the heirloom if he wished to keep the insignificant lives of both of them amidst this deep mountain wilderness. Refusing to let fear cloud his reason, he tightened his grip on the dagger in his hand, bracing himself to stand firm like a solid fortress wall in front of her, and boldly declared that he would rather be buried under this rubble than let that evil power fall into the hands of those blinded by fame and fortune. Realizing their words could not sway the ironclad will of the temple guardian in the slightest, they roared in anger and lunged forward simultaneously, swinging their weapons to deliver fatal blows intended to end the life of the one blocking their path. Right in that hair-raising moment of life and death, she suddenly noticed a small hexagonal stone pedestal hidden beneath the foot of the colossal ancestor statue, immediately using her quick wits to rush over, applying all her strength to forcefully turn it clockwise, exactly as a faded sketch in the yellowed notebook had suggested. A deep, rumbling roar instantly echoed from the depths of the earth, dragging along violent tremors that caused the entire stone floor of the shrine to crack open, forming a deep, bottomless chasm overflowing with a bright red light casting upwards from the abyss, thereby creating a perilous boundary that completely separated the brutal hunters from the central area of the marble pedestal. The violently surging waves of scorching heat, mixing with the horrific curses of the enemies as they were forced to clumsily back away, granted them a priceless window of time for him to grab her hand tightly, running around the back of the giant statue, and diving straight into a narrow, small tunnel that the ancient defense system had just opened right in the heart of the solid cliff. The narrow stone tunnel closed behind their backs just as the frustrated roars of the trapped hunters were entirely buried under the crashing collapse of earth and rock. signaling that the entire shrine had automatically activated a state of permanent lockdown, that the surrounding space was as black as ink and thick with the suffocating smell of sulfur, yet he still resolutely held tightly onto her icy hand, stumbling up and down along the steep, reverse stairs leading deep down into the very bottom of the netherworld. The violent tremors from above continued to rain down, causing the tunnel ceiling to fracture and drop sharp shards of rock, forcing the two to contort their bodies to dodge, guiding each other through treacherous curves that seemed to drain the very last bit of their fading strength. Overcoming that dark, suffocating stretch of road that felt as long as an entire century, a pale blue light finally appeared, leading them into a tranquil cave embracing a crystal-clear underground lake that reflected the sparkling mineral crystals clinging to the walls. He let his exhausted arms drop, leaning his back against a moss-covered slab of rock, panting heavily, yet his eyes exuded a strange serenity, knowing that the heirloom carrying the seed of disaster had been safely buried forever beneath the protection of the ancestors, along with those possessed of bottomless greed. She stepped over softly, using the edge of her mud-stained shirt to carefully wipe away the dried streak of blood on his forehead, then obediently rested her head upon that solid shoulder, listening to the heartbeat that was gradually returning to a steady rhythm after the horrific storm of life and death. Amidst the sacred stillness of the subterranean world, the two souls that once bore countless scars had now completely intertwined, profoundly understanding that the bloodline of the temple guardian was not a cruel curse, but a noble mission to maintain the balance of the human realm. Though the journey ahead still held countless challenges to find an exit toward the radiant sun, right in this moment, in their hearts, the fire of faith and an inseparable bond of love burned fiercely, powerful enough to incinerate every cold shadow that had besieged them for 10 long years. Resting by the tranquil underground lake helped both of them somewhat ease the exhaustion after the deadly escape, but they understood that this place could not be their final stop. He slowly stood up, casting his gaze around, and astutely noticed that the crystal-clear water was not stagnant, but rather rippling gently, flowing softly toward a hidden cove tucked behind mossy boulders. Speculating that all underground streams would eventually find a way to merge into the vast world outside, he carefully led her by the hand along the slippery edge of the lake, beginning the final leg of the journey to shed the cold embrace of the earth. Passing through the narrow cove redolent with the smell of damp mud and decaying tree roots, cool breezes carrying the pure scent of the great forest gradually seeped in, reawakening all the weary senses of the two. The thick darkness faded, giving way to glimmering rays of light casting down from a large fissure in the cave roof, kindling a fierce flame of hope for survival. With every last ounce of remaining strength, he braced himself to grab hold of the tangled ancient tree roots extending down from the mouth of the cave, painstakingly pulling her step by step up from the deep abyss. The scene that burst before their eyes when they stretched their shoulders and stepped out from the limestone fissure was a glorious dawn sky painting the puffy clouds pink over the misty mountain peak, marking the complete end to the dark days. Taking a deep breath of the fresh air of freedom, she threw her arms around him amidst thousands of warm sunbeams shining down, dissolving every sorrow and fear that had once besieged their souls. Now that the mission of the temple guardian was fulfilled and the family secret buried deep beneath thousands of layers of stalactites, they held hands as they walked down the sun-drenched hillside with an entirely new state of mind, ready to embrace a truly peaceful life that belonged solely to them. Beginning from the hillside bathed in the dawn's light, the two small figures simply kept their fingers intertwined, walking in a strangely tranquil peace, for they knew that the violent storms of 10 long years of running were now forever laid to rest beneath the deep layers of rock. The faint weariness on their scratched faces gave way to radiant smiles as both he and she realized that the life ahead was no longer a string of anxious, fearful days, but an entirely new chapter of freedom belonging to them alone, where love and understanding had conquered all forces of darkness. The story about the journey to protect the family heirloom closes not only as a thrilling adventure, but also leaves within each of us profound reflections on bravery, sacrifice, and the extraordinary power of true love. Sometimes in life, we have to face. Trials that seem the most suffocating and darkest, but it is precisely our unyielding determination and our faith in the light that will guide us through every adversity to find the shores of peace. That if you ladies and gentlemen enjoyed this emotional journey, please take a little time to hit the subscribe button, like, and share the video so we can spread these meaningful messages and catch many more fascinating stories updated every day. That I wonder how you all feel after listening to the satisfying conclusion of the two main characters, and whether this story reminds you of any difficult path that you yourselves have strongly overcome in reality. That we truly look forward to hearing the sincere thoughts and feelings coming from deep within your hearts through the comments left right below this video. Before we close these emotional reflections today, we would like to send our best wishes to all the audience watching the video, wishing everyone abundant health, an immensely joyful spiritual life, and that every passing day is filled with tranquil peace. Goodbye, and see you all in the next video.